Picture this for a second. It is the dead of winter, January 1897. You are deep in the isolated, freezing Appalachian Mountains of Greenbrier County, West Virginia. The wind is just absolutely howling through these steep, heavily wooded valleys, and the ground is frozen completely solid. And inside a quiet two-story frame house, a chilling discovery is about to be made. A discovery that is going to give birth to what is arguably America's most famous paranormal legal legend. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are stepping right into the dark, creepy shadows of history to unravel a truly unsettling tale. We are talking about a story of murder, deep-rooted folklore, and a mother's completely relentless, unyielding quest for justice. We're looking really closely at the case of Elva Zona Heaster Shue, who you might know better by her famous moniker, the Greenbrier Ghost. We are going to peel back the layers of this century-old mystery today, and we're going to completely dissect what is just a spooky campfire tale and what is cold, hard, historical fact. Trust me, the reality is actually way scarier than the myth. It's a question that honestly sends a cold shiver right down your spine, doesn't it? Can a ghost actually testify in a court of law? Well, if you happen to be driving down Route 60 in West Virginia today, you are going to see a state historical marker on the side of the road that proudly claims this specific event is the only known case in which testimony from a ghost helped convict a murderer. I mean, wow, it is an incredible hook. It's one of those things that instantly pulls us into the eerie, almost suffocating mystery of young Zona Heaster Shue and her incredibly imposing husband, Erasmus Trout Shue. But think about it. In an era long before modern forensics, long before CSI or DNA testing, how much real power did the supernatural hold over the American judicial system? To understand how a restless spirit allegedly took the witness stand, we first have to fully understand the very earthly, horrific tragedy that summoned her in the first place. Let's start by tracing the timeline of Zona's brief and ultimately completely tragic romance. In October of 1896, a youthful, vibrant Zona met a charismatic, muscular outsider who was working in town as a local blacksmith. His real name was Erasmus Stribling Shue, though basically everyone in town just called him Trout. Now, this union had red flags right from the start. Despite fierce, unwavering objections from Zona's mother, Mary Jane Heaster, who took an instant, visceral, and almost supernatural dislike to Trout the very moment she laid eyes on him, the two were married within just a matter of weeks. But the honeymoon phase was terrifyingly short. By early January 1897, Zona was already being treated for a mysterious, unnamed illness by the local physician, Dr. George W. Knapp. And then, the absolute unthinkable happened. On the freezing, desolate afternoon of January 23, 1897, an 11-year-old boy named Anderson Jones was sent over to the Shue house just to run a simple errand. What he found instead was the lifeless body of 23-year-old Zona, stretched out completely flat at the foot of the wooden stairs. Now, we need to talk about Trout's incredibly bizarre and deeply disturbing behavior immediately following the terrifying discovery of his wife's body, because this is where the story gets really, really unsettling. By the time Dr. Knapp rushed to the house, Trout had already moved the crime scene. He had carried Zona's body upstairs and laid her on the bed, but he went significantly further than that. He actually washed and dressed her body himself. Now, you have to understand the context here. In 1897, Appalachia, this was completely unheard of. Preparing a body for burial was strictly the solemn, traditional duty of the women in the community. Men just didn't do this. Furthermore, Trout obsessively dressed Zona in a high-necked frock with an unusually stiff collar, and he tightly tied a large, dark scarf around her neck, loudly proclaiming to everyone that it was her absolute favorite. And it gets worse. When Dr. Knapp attempted to medically examine her, Trout cradled Zona's head in his hands, weeping uncontrollably and reacting so aggressively and violently to the doctor even getting near her neck that Dr. Knapp was forced to cut his medical examination completely short. So, because Trout literally and violently prevented the doctor from conducting a thorough examination, the official record became a mess. And despite the doctor actually noting some faint, dark bruising on her neck during the brief time he had, the official cause of death was recorded under bizarre, supposedly natural causes. Initially, Dr. Knapp actually wrote down everlasting faint. Seriously, just let that sink in for a moment. Everlasting faint. What kind of medical diagnosis is that? And then, a week later, he inexplicably changed the official public record to childbirth, even though there was absolutely no evidence or even public knowledge that Zona was pregnant at the time. With this completely rushed and deeply flawed medical sign-off, Trout was able to legally secure a very quick burial for his young bride. He buried her deep in the frozen ground of the local cemetery. And as the dirt hit that coffin, Trout Shue likely thought he had completely, 100%, gotten away with murder. But here's the thing. He hadn't accounted for a mother's piercing intuition. Enter Mary Jane Heaster. From the very exact moment she was told of her young daughter's death, Mary Jane fiercely and uncompromisingly declared, "The devil killed her." She immediately suspected her brand new son-in-law of a brutal murder. And to really add to the deeply gothic, macabre vibe of this true crime story, we have to look at the local folklore that sprung up around the funeral. The story goes that when Mary Jane washed the white sheet used to line Zona's coffin during the wake, the water in the basin allegedly turned a deep, thick blood red, and the sheet itself was permanently stained a sickly pink no matter how much she scrubbed it. For Mary Jane, this wasn't just a weird coincidence. This was a clear, undeniable, and terrifying sign from the universe of foul play. Desperate for the hidden truth, she began to pray fervently every single night, practically begging for Zona to return from beyond the grave and reveal exactly how she met her end. And according to Mary Jane, those desperate nighttime prayers were actually answered in the most terrifying way imaginable. Treating the local folklore with absolute sincerity for a moment, Mary Jane testified that Zona's ghost visited her right at her bedside over 4 consecutive nights. Imagine waking up to that. The glowing apparition appeared in the exact same stiff-colored dress she was buried in. The ghost supposedly reveals the brutal, violent truth to her mother. She said Trout had come home from his blacksmith shop in a furious rage and physically attacked her. And to prove it, the ghost did something straight out of a horror movie. As she was leaving the room, the spirit of Zona turned her head completely around on her body to show her mother that her neck had been brutally snapped. It's a terrifying image, but armed with this spectral testimony, Mary Jane didn't cower in fear. She marched directly through the freezing winter cold to the local prosecutor's office. Now, for over a century, the legend has been exactly that. A ghost solved the crime and convicted a murderer. But we are here to debunk that legend. We are going to separate the myth from reality. While Mary Jane's terrifying ghost story is absolutely what got the authorities to reopen the case, it is absolutely not what sent Trout Shue to prison. When Mary Jane went to the prosecutor, a man named John Alfred Preston, he may or may not have believed her wild ghost story. But what he did recognize was that the swirling local rumors of foul play, combined with Trout's undeniably weird and suspicious behavior at the wake, warranted a serious second look. Ignoring the supernatural claims entirely, Preston focused purely on the physical. He officially ordered the exhumation of Zona's body. So, detail by earthly detail, the real investigation began to unfold. On a freezing, bitter day in late February, Zona's body was dug up from the Soul Chapel Methodist Cemetery. Now, because there was no formal morgue anywhere in the area, the autopsy had to be performed right in a local one-room schoolhouse by a team of 3 doctors. And here is a chilling, almost cinematic detail from the historical record. Trout Shue was legally forced to attend this autopsy. So as the doctors made their incisions, Trout sat nearby in the schoolhouse, just nervously and aggressively whittling a stick with a pocket knife. Suddenly, the doctors made a grim, undeniable discovery. The clinical autopsy revealed that Zona's neck was completely dislocated between the first and second vertebra. Her windpipe was entirely crushed, and there were unmistakable deep finger marks on her throat indicating she had been violently choked to death. When the doctors announced out loud that the neck was definitively broken, witnesses noted that Trout's defensive, arrogant demeanor completely collapsed right then and there. From that moment on, the hard, circumstantial, completely earthly evidence against Trout began to pile up incredibly rapidly. Once Trout was formally arrested, criminal investigators finally started digging into his past, and what they found was genuinely horrifying. Trout was not just some unlucky, grieving widower. He had a dark, violent, and highly predatory track record. His first marriage ended in a very bitter divorce after his wife accused him of extreme, brutal physical cruelty. Between his marriages, he actually served a 2-year prison sentence for horse theft. But even worse than that, his second wife had died under highly suspicious circumstances. The story was she allegedly died from a mysteriously dropped brick to the head while Trout was conveniently repairing a chimney right above her. Adding to this incredibly damning psychological profile, while he was sitting in jail awaiting trial for Zona's murder, Trout arrogantly boasted to the other inmates that his life goal was to have 7 wives, and he bragged that he'd never be convicted of Zona's murder because there were simply no earthly witnesses to the crime. So we arrive at the trial, and the ultimate twist of this legal proceeding completely shatters the myth we've all been told. Get this, the prosecution team never used the ghost story to try and convict Trout Shue. They didn't even bring it up. They knew perfectly well that spectral evidence was entirely inadmissible in a court of law. I mean, it hadn't been legally allowed in America since the Salem witch trials. Instead, the prosecution relied heavily and entirely on those devastating clinical autopsy results and Trout's incredibly suspicious controlling behavior. So you might be wondering, how on earth did the ghost get into the official court record in the first place? It was actually the defense attorney, desperately hoping to make Mary Jane Heaster look completely insane and entirely discredit her vital testimony about Trout's weird behavior. The defense relentlessly cross-examined her about the ghost while she was on the witness stand. But the strategy backfired spectacularly. Mary Jane remained incredibly calm, unyielding, and totally consistent in her story. She didn't look crazy to the jury at all. Instead, she looked entirely, powerfully convincing. And that brings us to this staggering number on the screen. 1 hour and 10 minutes. That is exactly how long it took the 12-man jury to deliberate before returning a verdict of guilty for first-degree murder. Just a little over an hour. They saw right through Trout's lies and the defense's desperate tactics. The jury convicted him based entirely on earthly facts. They looked at the crushed windpipe, the broken neck, his horrifying history of domestic violence, and his bizarre attempts to hide his wife's fatal injuries by dressing her in that stiff collar. Trout, she was sentenced to life in the state penitentiary in Moundsville, West Virginia, where he ultimately died just 3 years later of an unknown epidemic. So let's be crystal clear. The ghost didn't convict him. Cold, hard forensic science and undeniable circumstantial evidence did. But if the ghost didn't actually convict him in court, why does the ghost story endure so strongly even today? Modern academic research reveals something deeply, deeply profound about this case, and this is why this history really matters. You have to remember, in 1897, women had virtually no legal protections. The phrase domestic violence literally did not exist in the cultural vocabulary. Violence inside the home was often treated as a strictly private family matter, routinely swept quietly under the rug by a completely indifferent, male-dominated legal system. Mary Jane Heaster was a brilliant, grieving mother who absolutely knew in her bones that her daughter had been murdered by a serial abuser. But without an eyewitness, who was going to listen to her? So she likely utilized the deeply rooted folklore and spiritual beliefs of her isolated Appalachian community as a highly calculated tool. By framing her horrific discovery of the murder as a terrifying ghost story, she successfully commanded the attention of the public and forced the local authorities to dig up the body. She used the myth to effectively uncover the indisputable physical evidence, which leaves us with one final, incredibly provocative question to ponder as we wrap up. Was this truly a case of a restless spirit returning from the grave to seek spectral vengeance, turning her head completely around in the dark of night? Or was it actually the ultimate display of a mother's sharp intuition and fierce, unwavering determination? Did Mary Jane genuinely see a ghost? Or did she brilliantly weaponize a local ghost story to ensure that a violent, predatory man was locked away forever? Whatever you personally choose to believe, the true story of the Greenbrier Ghost stands as an incredibly powerful testament to a woman who utterly refused to let her daughter's murder be silenced. It shows us that sometimes, when the system fails, the living are the ones who must bravely speak for the dead. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I hope you found this as fascinating as I did. And as always, keep questioning the real history behind the legend.